Nadja.
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 Nadja. I can speak Russian. Better than food, man. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Great to see you as usual. Hope you're doing well. Today I have something very unique for you. Nadja by André Breton. Breton was one of the founding members of Surrealism and wrote the Surrealist Manifesto in 1924, which I have not read yet. It may have been better to start with that one first, but Nadja I had on my shelf for so long and I had been interested in for some time, so I started with this one. It's sort of a novel, and we'll get to that. The book is eccentric like the character who wrote it. Breton kept all sorts of artifacts and pieces of art and curios in his Parisian apartment. He was notorious for collecting things, for being a collector of art and bizarre objects from all around the world. Like I said, Breton was one of the founding members of Surrealism and wielded a lot of power in these circles. So at one point, he was deciding who was coming in and who was going out, who was being excommunicated and so on and so forth. And had this sort of strange dogmatic thing going on. At one point he was a communist, I'm not sure how serious, but he was a member of the Communist Party, and later on he was an anarchist. So he's the tone you get from Breton is that he's really kind of like all or nothing with all of the things he's interested in. He's just like absolutist, really, really, again, dogmatic, sort of this, passionate, fiery character, but a little diluted. And I found the light. During World War I, Breton studied medicine and psychiatric disease, which probably deeply influenced Surrealism and this novel. He worked with these shell-shocked patients, right? He was interested in psychiatry. And I think this is where the beginnings of the interest with the unconscious began to develop. He mentions Freud in this novel, Nadja. I mean, Nadja is full of references, as you'll see, as we'll discuss. But this may have been where all of these things, the ideas for Surrealism and the ideas for Nadja began to germinate, began to develop. A very disturbing period. It's obvious that everybody around that time was seeing some shit, basically. World War I seemed to be just catastrophic on every single level. Like I said, Breton was working with these shell-shocked patients, and madness seems to be a preoccupation in the Surrealist circles. And rather than running from it, it seems that Surrealism is seeking to find the truth in madness and the madness in truth, or something like that. The heavier the contradiction, the more surreal it is. So there's a lot to these circles, a lot to the history, and my knowledge, my grasp of the history is rudimentary at best, so bear with me here. And please comment if you have something interesting to say that I've missed or I've made a mistake or something, which is entirely plausible. World War I produced Dada, the art movement. Explicitly anti-war, a reactionary movement. It's like an artistic, violent recoiling in horror to warfare. It's like, kind of like, Duchamp's urinal and all these things, like, sort of like equating to like art is shit and it won't save you, basically. That's sort of like the sentiment. It's not necessarily like death to art, really, but it seemed incredibly cynical. And it was sort of appropriate for witnessing the catastrophe, the catastrophic slaughter of human beings on a scale that the world had never known. Surrealism emerged from Dada, and it was specifically trying to escape the trap of reason, right? And Breton was very vocal about this. I'm assuming in the manifesto, though I haven't read it. But I'm sure a lot of the same ideas in the manifesto can be found in Nadja. It started with, I think, automatic writing or automatic drawing, automatic responses to things without any sort of filter, any sort of logical, rational, reasonable filter. They wanted to escape reason and rationality. It seems because their only conclusion after living through World War I is that's where we end up with reason and rationality, right? That's where it ends. It ends in this, right? This You know, the utilitarian bourgeois values inevitably lead to this slaughter of mankind, right? That's actually where everything goes, you know. So this surrealist group was formed out of these artists and writers. And of course you've heard of them in this group, or at least some of them. And because they're so cool, right? It's this very insular group at this very specific time in this very specific place, which is pre-World War II Paris. And you have all of these personalities and these characters. It's mysterious, it's surprising, it's secretive, it's pretty cool. The most interesting art being created in Europe at the time seemed to be in this circle, or these circles, as there's a lot of them. Many famous artists and writers held varying degrees of association, right? You had Max Ernst, you had Man Ray, you had Louis Buñuel, Juan Miró, Salvador Dali, Louis Aragon, Antonin Artaud, you know, all of these people, you know, legendary artists and writers and filmmakers and so on. Some were in, some were on the edge, on the peripheral, and some were just kicked out. That's the thing. Breton started to get to this ideological standpoint where he was morally condemning a lot of the members and he was excommunicating them. Began to have this very religious, political, cult-like quality to it, which is ironic because it feels like that's what Breton was trying to escape in the first place. Breton was trying to get to the unconscious, which may be for him synonymous with freedom, which may also be contradictory. But the thing about the surrealists is they love contradiction. That's the whole thing, right? You could read about this group for days. I mean, it's a lot of fun because there's all these characters who we love and their stories all intersect. You discover these connections between people that you hadn't seen before. And that is one of the main focal points for Breton is these connections with the unconscious, the connections between unreality and reality, you know, the blending of the two. That's very much the atmosphere of Nadja, the blending of reality and the unconscious, surreality or whatever. Many of these characters, these artists and writers, had a tremendous influence on modern art for better or worse. Reason is the enemy. Freedom will come through the unconscious. Sort of like punk rock in the 20s. A spirit that sort of flames out really quick and dies and leaves this vacuum for politics, right? I live right next to the Salvador Dali Museum here in St. Petersburg, and it's sort of like, you know, it's kind of like the Hard Rock Cafe with Sex Pistols memorabilia. That's sort of the vibe I get, but you know. So Nadja was published in 1928, and Nadja refers to the name of this woman that Breton is obsessed with in the book. She's named after the first part of the Russian word for hope, and because it's only the beginning. That's from the book. Definitely has some Marxist undertones, as you know, that was what Breton was associated with then and later on with Trotsky and all that. Nadja. So Nadja is a woman who is already insane or in the process of going completely insane, based off an actual woman Breton knew named Leona. I read on Wikipedia she was a patient of Pierre Genet's, a French psychologist who influenced Freud and Jung, and I believe Breton was interested in psychiatry, but I think he does away with it at this certain point in the novel, when he realizes that she's gone insane and he has to separate himself from her. And then his obsession is with the lack of her, like the absence of her, as opposed to actually having her there. After he rails against psychiatry and how they treat the insane, he ends the chapter like this. The well-known lack of frontiers between non-madness and madness does not induce me to accord a different value to the perceptions and ideas which are the result of one or the other. There are sophisms infinitely more significant and far-reaching than the most indisputable truths. To call them into question as sophisms, it must be admitted that they have done more than anything else to make me hurl at myself or at anyone who comes to meet me the forever pathetic cry of, "Who goes there? Is it you, Nadja? Is it true that the beyond, that everything beyond is here in this life? I can't hear you. Who goes there? Is it only me? Is it myself?" You can definitely see the poetic influence on Breton. You know, he was a fan of Rimbaud, of Baudelaire, and it certainly comes through in the work. And I think he references both of them in this book. A book of references. I love that. You know, I've spoken about that before, I think. I love seeing what people love. I love hearing about books that famous writers or artists love. It's the thread of history. It's the human web, or whatever you want to call it. I love that. And so this book is perfect for those who are interested in discovering those connections, discovering those threads. So because of her madness, they eventually split. You know, he realizes she's crazy. And then, you know, Breton becomes obsessed with her absence. The thing about Nadja is that she's not actually a woman so much as she's a feeling, and a feeling or a muse, very integral to the surrealist philosophy, if you want to call it that, the surrealist modus operandi, this surrealist idea manifested in the form of a woman that he's falling in love with. Nadja is the quintessential French surrealist novel. In the beginning, he discusses all of these things he's interested in, all of these pieces of art and buildings and writers and things and places and ideas. And that's the beginning of the book, basically. Him wandering around Paris, going to see a play and discussing it, and finding a copy of Rimbaud in a flea market, and discussing Huysmans and all these things. You'll recognize some of the names of authors I've reviewed before, and you'll recognize many of the names of surrealist artists that he's referencing. And the interesting thing about this book is that there are these images everywhere. As you can see, here's one of an actress in a play he goes to see. And so you get a feel, this is the flea market where he finds Rimbaud, and you have these images. They're sometimes photographs, and they're sometimes pieces of, you know, pieces of art or just objects, like this is a woman's glove, and there's a whole story behind that. Sometimes they're actual places or buildings or statues, you know. So it's interesting. You actually get to see what he's writing about. He maps out his own personal Paris at the time, right? You know, that is exclusive to the mind of Breton. And that alone is interesting. That's enough to read the book if you're interested in the era, just because of the, you know, seeing it through his eyes and seeing the connections that he's making. And just the atmosphere in general, because this is pre-World War II Paris, you know, something that just is not there anymore, hasn't been for a long time, and all of these characters around at the time are so unique, so bizarre. It's a novel, maybe. It's sort of a novel and a journal. I don't know what you would call it exactly. It's a strange book. It also acts in some cases like a critique, like it's almost, or maybe an essay, but not quite at all. It's linear, but I don't know what to do with it. It's not easily explained or summarized, but of course that was their entire thing. They were trying to run from being placed in a box, right? They were trying to escape the box, you know. It's like he was terrified of being understood. It's disorienting, like a dream, right? The distortion of reality. But it is linear, I will say that. It plays out in a linear fashion. There's this heavy emphasis on revolution in Breton's thought, and it's interesting to note that Nadja's name is, you know, the first part of hope. Question is, what is Nadja hope for, right? With all his talk of revolution, it seems she represents this hope for freedom, or perceived freedom. What freedom means to Breton, with his contradictions and his moral idealism, it seemed to be like, you know, freedom meant the unconscious, like he was striving for the unconscious to break through reason and rationality. But I can't say, you know, I can't say what freedom meant to André Breton, and I'm not sure if he could either. It's interesting that he creates things that seem intentionally crazy, yet he shuns this woman, which I think he did in real life as well, though I'm not certain about that, because she's actually crazy, you know. I think she got locked up and he never went to visit her or something. I believe that's the case. I read that somewhere. But at least in the book, that is what happens. He dwells on her absence, and sort of, you know, because the real thing sort of loses its mystique for him when he realizes that she's nuts. So I enjoyed all of the references with all the threads leading in all these different directions. These strong, vivid personalities at the time that he was associated with. But I don't understand it. I definitely don't understand it. And I think that's part of the point, you know? So I have an interesting relationship with this book. I like it sometimes, and then I dislike it other times. It seems to be an attempt at a fusion of real life and art, trying to capture the mechanism of the unconscious in a reproducible piece of work. The book collects all of these characters and pictures and pieces of art, sort of like Breton himself, right? It blends romance and criticism and philosophy and psychology and politics, and it's this very unique jumble mess. This question of the use of art came up the other day with a fan and I. It's a very interesting question. You know, what is the use of art? Is art meant to be useful? Is art fundamentally opposed to use? And that's one of the things that I was thinking about the entire time while reading this novel. I don't know. It's an interesting question. It's something that I'm sure many of you have strong opinions about. And, you know, can beauty be utilitarian? Is it useful? Is beauty useful? Is art beautiful? Is art useful? I'm sure I don't know, but it would be interesting to do a video on that. I'm sure everyone in the comments section will be very well behaved. So if you're interested in learning more about the dynamics of these circles, read the biography of Georges Bataille that I reviewed a while back. It's a fascinating window into their relationship. They were enemies and then collaborators. Breton is very much concerned with morality and sort of making things pure and clean, it seems, which totally conflicts with Bataille, of course. Breton's tone can come off as overly critical and floral, kind of snobbish, a little obnoxious. But if you're interested in surrealism or the art of that era, this is definitely up your alley. It's totally worth your time. And it's very unique as a book. I've never read anything like it, you know, with all of the different elements working together. It's very strange. I still haven't wrapped my head around it. It definitely deserves a reread. Because it's like poetry, but then it's like an essay or a personal essay, and then it's criticism, but then it's a love story, but then it's, you know, a journal, you know, him hanging out with his friends. I mean, it's like, there's a real tragic story there about him being in love with the woman who went insane. But it seems kind of overshadowed by Breton's preoccupation with the surreal. And so I wonder if reality was just a little bit too much for him. I feel like I've outgrown surrealism a little bit. You know, it's kind of for the young, right? It's like punk. It's like you fall in love with it, and maybe you never totally outgrow it. Like, man, it still hits hard, you know, and it's still cool. But it's like I can't dive into surrealism like I used to be able to, you know. It all kind of has this kind of, like, it stayed too long at the party, you know. I'm not poo-pooing surrealism. I'm just saying, you know, there are other things maybe that I'm more interested in now, other literary movements or eras. However, if you're a fan of surrealism, or if you're just getting into it, this is absolutely for you. Again, you should definitely pick this up. Nadja by Andre Breton. Great place to start. Maybe start with the Surrealist Manifesto, though, which I made the mistake of not doing. Okay, time for the coffee lottery. If you would like to help support the show and get in on the book and coffee lottery, you can go to patreon.com/books-are-better-than-food and donate $5 or more per video, and I will write your name on a piece of paper and I will place it in this mason jar. And for every book that I review, I will draw a name, and whoever's name I draw, they get sent the book I'm reviewing for that day and a bag of delicious coffee roasted by yours truly. And I have been drinking a delicious Kenyan coffee lately. It's just been phenomenal. It's a pea berry, actually. This is the green coffee. It comes in these big bags. And I get it from Sweet Maria's out of Oakland, California. They're fantastic. The notes on this one are red raspberry, cooked down with raw brown sugar, dried cherry, tamarind, orange pulp, grape skins, good Kenyan espresso. I'd love a way to make espresso here at home. Unfortunately, I don't have the money to invest in a La Marzocco or anything. Though, if one of you would be kind enough... No, I'm just joking. All right, that's enough of that. So who's it going to be? It's a beautiful day out there. Oh, hey! Good deal. Luke. Luke is going to get a copy of Andre Breton's Nadja, a bag of delicious Kenyan coffee. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Again, you can support the show at patreon.com/books-are-better-than-food if you'd be so kind. Thank you to all the new supporters. You can also stop by Facebook and give me a like. Those really help me out. Really appreciate it. You can also find me on Instagram, Twitter. I think that's it. That's all the social media I need, that's for sure. It's seriously an addiction, isn't it? It's really hard to kind of separate. I mean, you just wake up and start looking at your phone, scroll, blue light everywhere. Oh man, I gotta cut it out. Books are good for that. You know, books are really good. I want to just, you know, stress, get physical books, you know, just make sure you have physical books in the house because we stare at screens enough. You know, I know ebooks and, you know, it's convenient and all that, but I mean, like, physical books really do help for calming down at night. If you have some books you'd like to send me, you can find my address in the description box below. And it's very kind of you. Many fans have been doing it lately, and it's just been overwhelming. I mean, really, really kind. So if that was you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been very, very generous, very generous. Thank you. Always remember, die reading. Have a good night. Talk to you soon. Take care. Ciao.